liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
You're tapped in, so let's get to it. So, as a lot of us know, this government has conducted biological experimentations on Black Americans through the 19th, the 20th century, to be more exact. We think back to Tuskegee experimentation and others that may have taken place. But those are the ones we know. What about the ones we aren't aware of that took place? I happened to come across one that I was not familiar with. I hadn't known about at all until today. And I found it quite disturbing, to say the least. This government, I and others, we don't put nothing past it. You know, there is a certain distrust for the government, for the people who run the government, you know, for those who are supposedly the majority of not just the government, but the country. We understand that there's such thing as institutional racism exists, that white supremacy exists. To what extent, we can only imagine. My imagination didn't take me this far, but it did. Once I understood the Tuskegee experiment on Black men, I understood then that, yeah, there is nothing they won't do in terms of experimentation. And those experiments, we think, were conducted to find a way that would rid the country, you know, of the Black population if ever the need came about or had to be, you know, something that had to be done. They would have the experiments at hand or the results of those experiments to try to facilitate such a thing. So, yeah, they've been conducting experiments on the Black American for a very, very long time. And again, I just ran across some. I want to bring this in to give it context. Before I do, please like, share, follow, and follow and subscribe to this channel. Tapped. We appreciate everyone's involvement with this channel and your viewership. It means a great deal to us. And so we want to say thank you for those who have already joined and subscribed to this channel. We appreciate that very much. Let me get into this because it's very disturbing. And it has me and others, we here at TAP had a discussion about this. What's to say, who's to say that experiments have stopped, especially those types of experiments that are conducted on Black Americans? Who's to say that they've ceased? We here tend to think that they haven't. You know, we think that corporations like Planeteer, who openly say they do biotechnological experimentations on human beings as well as live people, we tend to think that they are now the entity, or, you know, the company, the corporation that does these experiments, releasing or relieving the U.S. government of such a burden, or let's say of such wrongdoing. You know, the government wants to make sure that, okay, we have these in mind, these experimentations on African Americans or Black Americans, but we can't do them. So how about we contract them out? We think that is what is occurring. All right. And in their mind, the government, those who push for these type of experimentations, in their mind, they're relieving themselves of guilt, you know, or involvement. However, they still have given the seal of approval to, let's say, companies such as Planeteer, possibly Open AI, possibly Anthropic, and others. All right. We know again that Palantir, they openly discuss biotechnology and experimentation on human beings. All right. Now, no one knows to what extent these experiments are conducted or why they take place. No one knows this. As long as the corporation are responsible for these experimentations that very well, can be taking place, they don't have to disclose a whole lot of what they do. The government is different, the government is different in that they may have to disclose it, or they may disclose it decades later, but they won't be held responsible for these things. And Planeteer is different, or corporations like that are different. There's a certain standard also that they would have, that they are beholden to, in terms of whether or not they could be sued. That's another thing. You have a better chance of suing them than you would the government in such matters, or in matters like this. Anyway, let me get to this. There is, again, no evidence that the U.S. government is currently conducting unethical or non-consensual human experiments on Black or minority populations in the matter of historical cases like that of Tuskegee, for instance. But however, systematic racism and inequity, persists in healthcare, okay, leading to high levels of mistrust and fears of experimentation among Black Americans. Key aspects of the current medical research and ethics, safety protections, things of that nature, following the outcry over the Tuskegee study, which ended in 1972, the government created stringent protections, including institutional review boards, or IRBs, to monitor ethical standards in research. But mistrust and disparity still exists. A 2024 survey showed that 55% of Black Americans believe non-consensual medical experiments are still conducted on Black people today, highlighting a deep historical and ongoing distrust in the system. Informed consent and emergency research, for instance, Black Americans are sometimes overrepresented in studies that do not require individual informed consent, such as in emergency care research. These are raising questions about equity. Clinical trial participation. While there is a recognized need for more diversity in clinical trials, minorities, including Black Americans, have historically been underrepresented through efforts, though efforts are now being made to include them to ensure drugs work for all populations. The racial bias in algorithms, okay, recent studies have shown that some medical algorithms used to assess patient health have been biased, sometimes leading to lower prioritization of Black patients for care, such as in kidney transplant studies. While explicit government sanctioned non-consensual experimentation on Black people has been officially banned, the legacy of these practices has created a lasting, profound, and often justified mistrust of the medical system by Black communities. Now and again, just because the government has sanctioned that these experiments cease under their name, okay, doesn't mean that they've stopped. All right. Just because they say that, that doesn't mean that's the case. Now, to help me with this, I do have a couple of clips I want to impart in this to bring us greater context in terms of what this story is all about. With everything that's going on in the world, we cannot leave or be so unattentive to leaving any stone unturned. We must look under every rock to get an understanding of what's going on. So when we look and we find these things, we'll know how to address them, but we're only going to know of them if we start to investigate and start looking under these rocks. Okay, that being said, I do have a clip. I want to bring this clip in again, like I said, for context. Before I do, please like, share, follow, comment, and subscribe to Tapped, the Art of Political Discourse. Everyone's participation and viewership as far as this channel and its content is concerned, we appreciate it very much. All right, can't say that enough. All right, that being said, let's get to this clip. Very disturbing. I have to say, I have a couple that I'm going to inject into this, this part of the content before it's all said and done. But here this go. Let's check this one out first. And this is courtesy of Roots Preserved, okay? Title is "The Government Secretly Sprayed This Housing Project with Chemicals." Okay.
They didn't ask for our permission. We didn't ask for them to spray us. My government used me like I was a guinea pig.
They're waiting us out. They're waiting on all of us to die.
What if I told you the U.S. government once sprayed a mysterious fog over thousands of its own citizens without ever telling them? This isn't a movie plot. This was North St. Louis in the 1950s, and it happened over a place called Pruitt-Igoe. a predominantly black community. Pruitt-Igoe was a massive housing project built after World War II. 33 high-rise buildings, over 2,800 apartments. Originally, the buildings were designed to be segregated, but shortly after the first residents moved in, the U.S. Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision and the 1955 ban on formal segregation in federal housing projects forced the St. Louis Housing Authority to lift racial restrictions. When the
That was in 1968, okay?
buildings were integrated, most of the whites moved out. Government funding was cut almost immediately after the buildings were opened. Maintenance fell behind. Elevators broke. Hallways went dark. Within a few years, the buildings were crumbling from the inside out. And during all this, the U.S. Army launched something called Operation Large Area Coverage.
Wow.
They wanted to see how biological weapons might spread across American cities. Their test site, Pruitt-Igoe.
The greatest concentration of this compound was sprayed near the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex just south of downtown St. Louis. It was home to 10,000 low-income people
And rather than say 10,000 Black Americans, she just said people to give a description of the number and not necessarily a description of the racial profile of these people. And the piece says it itself, all the whites moved out. So yes, of course, the blacks moved in. And as a result, you know, that experiment by the U.S. Army was conducted. It makes one wonder, though, had the white population remained in those projects and Brown, you know, certain laws in terms of segregation were not passed, would they have ran that experiment on those white citizens like they did the Black Americans? Makes you wonder.
estimated 70% were under the age of 12.
Using motorized blowers on rooftops and even station wagons driving through the streets, the Army released a chemical called zinc cadmium sulfide into the air. Officials told residents it was just a harmless smokescreen test meant to protect the city from a Soviet attack. But people remember something very different.
The spray was so foul as far as the odor. It made some of us have headaches, nausea, dizziness.
That's what I remember. It made me sick.
It wasn't the weather. It was an eerie smoke descending from rooftops, rolling from the backs of trucks.
Regular flatbed truck, but it had a big machine on the back. And it had a big nozzle that really sprayed a fog you couldn't even see through. It was that thick. And it really, we felt it as it would adhere to our skin. And as far as the guys on top of the buildings, they tried to portray them to us as maintenance workers. But we was like, what is a maintenance worker doing? And basically a hazmat suit.
The Army
And I think at that point, brothers and sisters, Black men and women, they should have had enough sense to go indoors and get the hell out of the area, because it was then that you know, something went off in their psyches, their minds, saying, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. This is not right. Let us get out of the way. You know, but, you know, the question could be then, you know, the response to that could, where would they have went? Where could they have gone? You know, they had nowhere else to go.
Always insisted the chemical compound was safe. Martino Taylor believes documents prove otherwise.
There's a lot of evidence that indicates that people in St. Louis, in the city, particularly in minority communities, were subjected to military tests that was connected to a larger radiological weapons development and testing project.
And again, so you're left wondering, what other experiments have they done, studies have they conducted on African or Black Americans in that time, the 50s, 60s, 70s as well, that has not been brought to the forefront or exposed or made known to the general public. There has to be quite a few, I think, very many to say the least.
The Army insisted the powder was safe, but cadmium is now recognized as a probable human carcinogen. Some researchers also believe radioactive materials may have been mixed in, though the government never confirmed that. By the late 1960s, Pruitt-Igoe was declared unlivable. The buildings were abandoned and then demolished. Today, many former residents suffer from rare cancers and chronic respiratory problems.
Wow.
Martino Taylor claims they all unknowingly inhaled this compound morning, noon, and night, so the government could measure its effects on their lungs.
So this is in violation of all medical ethics, all international codes, and the military's own policy at that time.
I lost my 2 older siblings to cancer. I lost a brother last month.
I've been diagnosed recently with a rare form of lymphoma.
I had cancer of the left kidney, had partial removal of my left kidney.
They're still fighting for answers.
Oh, wow. That is incredible. And, you know, a lot of blacks wonder how is it that they've come down with a lot of these ailments, these sicknesses, these cancers, especially black adults, men and women who are of a certain age in their 50s and 60s, all of a sudden developing, or these cancers just coming out of nowhere. Yeah, for the most part, a lot of us, we need to go and get certain checkups, medical checkups, or, you know, have those checkups done. But again, the fear is, okay, I go, but what are you doing? You know, what are you doing to me? You know, when I go and I tell you my name, do they go to a data bank that has a registry of individuals who grew up in that community at the time of that experimentation? And now the experiment continues. You know, the research continues. You know, now they're documenting the effects of this poison that was sprayed upon, you know, Black Americans. So yeah, you would find a reluctance to go and sit in a hospital and ask them, hey, what's wrong with me? Because we don't know, or that individual would not know whether or not once they get that medical file, you know, something in it says, okay, check for this, that, and this. And they align all this information to understand what the effects of the experiment was, how, you know, long it took for this or that to occur. But there's a lot of mistrust, and there's good reason. There's good reason. Okay, I have another clip though, aside from that one, and I tell you, see, this project has a life of its own in terms of how the government went about doing what they did. You know, this thing went a long way. All right. So here's another part of the experiment, similar to the one we just saw. Very similar. Okay, let's get in here and pay attention.
1950. The Army secretly released bacteria over the entire city for 6 days. It was called Operation Sea Spray. Naval vessels off the coast released clouds of bacteria across civilian neighborhoods. The bacteria was classified as harmless. It was not. Within days, hospitals reported a surge of patients, all with the same rare infection. Doctors had no explanation. Edward Nevin, 75 years old, routine procedure. He never recovered. He passed away October 1st, 1950. His family was never told. San Francisco was not alone. Over 200 similar operations.
Over 200 similar operations across American cities occurred. Over 200. And you have to ask your question, are these experiments still being conducted? Different now, you know, different types of experiments they may be, but the question is, are they occurring? When we see chemtrails and things of that nature in the sky, is that some form of experimentation on the populace?
Across American cities, no consent, no warning. In 1977, investigators confirmed the operations took place. The Army denied responsibility for a single patient. In 1981, Nevin's grandson sued the government. The court ruled the Army had full legal protection. No consequences, no apology, nothing. Every detail in this story comes from official government documents, public record, subscribe.
Wow. And that was not even the extent of the experimentation, but that's just some of what was taking place. So while it was going or happening in St. Louis, it was also happening in San Francisco, as well as 200 other cities in these United States. So the last piece, one thing that did stand out to me was that there was a specific racial identity or demographic attached to the experiment. San Francisco, you can well imagine back then in the 1950s, had to have been more Caucasian, more white than anything else, maybe some Asians and blacks as well. But I noticed there was no mention of a specific demographic or ethnicity or group of people. But the point in that, or should be that, these experiments, for the most part, I would like to say, I think that they're not conducted racially. You know, some have to be conducted, you know, non-racially, just in general, to see the effects of all peoples. You know, so the government, what that says then is that the government has or looks at, it's funny to say this like that, but you know, for lack of a better phrase, it looks at the American citizen as an existential threat. You know, that's the only way to call that, or, you know, look at that or label it, you know. But the fact of the matter is this did occur. So the question is, as a result of all those experiments, human experiments, non-consensual experiments, what is the toll of the people? All right. Now, with that question being asked, and hopefully a lot of you would like to drop your thoughts and comments about that, you know, in the chat. But are these experiments are they still being conducted? And if so, who are conducting them? Like to think that the American government has, you know, more sense to, you know, attach, you know, any military to experimentations on the American citizens. So you would think that the American government would contract that type of experimentation out to a private firm or corporation, again, like Planeter. No one really knows. In any respect, the government is still complicit in the experimentation or of the experimentation of U.S. citizens. This is fine. It's quite disturbing. I think it's egregious. It shows a certain evil that exists and very well may persist in this country by those who are in power. Something to think about, people. With everything going on in the world today, I think most of us don't see what is occurring. All right. The experimentation aspect of it is just part of it, but we have the attack on the Constitution, on voting rights, on First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, things of that nature, where we're being shown that laws, statutes, governance, you know, of the people does not apply to the rich or the powerful. Something is happening, and as our responsibility, not just as citizens of this country, but as human beings, we're supposed to want to know or get to the very bottom of what is happening, not just with the government and in it, but to the people of this nation. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that. Again, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what you think about this issue. Is that something that needs to be really considered? The fact that, hey, certain illegal experimentations took place against a certain demographic, you know, in the country. Not only that, but did those experimentations also spill over to other ethnicities and demographics? All right. And if so, what about the experimentation of today? Who does it affect? Where are these experiments taking place? Who is being experimented on and why? Okay. Again, leave your thoughts in the comments. We appreciate every bit of those comments. We read them all. Until next time, take care of yourselves and one another.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.